I'm breaking every single one of my rules for survival doing this. And yet, I know if I don't, I'll die of hunger in a few weeks. Or worse, they'll find me when I'm sleeping and carry me off to where they dwell, nestled in the tunnels beneath the city. I stare into the abyssal depths below me, nothing to make out but the now motionless escalator stairs, poking their way out of the blackness. I take one last deep breath, savor the clean, crisp February air, and make my way down to find Nate. Nate's the greatest survival tool any scavenger can have. A full-bred German shepherd, one who can hear a pin drop a mile away and smell danger just as far. I found Nate in an apartment on the 6th day of the crossing, as it was termed by the media at the time. By this time, the portals had opened up across the planet in every nation, and all manner of demons began to cross over. I had hidden in my apartment for as long as I could, but had been too scared to leave and stock up on supplies in the first few days. All I had was a Nutri-Grain bar and week-old milk lying in the fridge. I had no choice but to go out and look for food. I searched the apartments around my own, tiptoeing from one to another, almost vomiting at the chaos and gore left in each, finding little or nothing in the majority of them. In room 304, where I had seen a young family with a little girl move in the month before, I found canned food and bottles of spring water. The carpet was soaked in blood, but no bodies. I know now where they were brought and what was done to them. And I thank God that I didn't know at the time, or I would have never left the building to begin with. In what I took to be the young girl's room, I heard whimpering come from a small cabinet by the bedside. As I opened the small sliding door, I found a puppy, no more than 10 or 12 weeks old. Immediately, I fell in love, which is a rare thing when you're standing in an apartment block caked in the remains of its tenants. Ever since then, he's been my closest companion. But no less than 20 minutes ago, one of those demonic spawn grabbed him as I was searching a broken down ambulance near the hospital. I heard a short and painful whimper and rushed out to the street, only to see the gangly, malnutrition limbs of one of their stalkers vanish into the entrance of the subway on Granite Street. They don't kill and eat animals the way they do humans. They use them, changing them into one of their own, altering their bodies. Dogs are always favored for their tracking skills, and have marked the end of many a survivor. That's why I have to find him, if not to save him, to release him from the torture and cruelty that bondage to these things entails. The further I travel down, the stronger the smell of rotten decay becomes, leaving a sickly bitter taste in the back of my throat. In the past, I would have vomited or had to smear vapor rub on my upper lip to withstand it. But now I've become so accustomed to it, it's like second nature to me. Every few steps, I find myself standing on the withered remains of those who tried to escape the subway when the portals opened, and they crossed over. Those who were trampled beneath the feet of the swarming crowd, like rats escaping through the cracks of a burning building. A bone was cracking beneath my boots every 6 or 7 steps, and I almost tumbled downwards on a few. My flashlight only shines 10 or 12 feet ahead of me, and ahead of that, I'm met with an unending darkness. It's like this for 10 or 15 minutes, until I finally reach the subway floor. The smell's at its worst down here, and the floors are littered with bones and filth left over by those ungodly creatures further down the tracks. Suddenly, an inhuman shriek rings out from somewhere, not far in the darkness, and my heart drops to my stomach like a ton of lead. I turn off my light and go prone to the cold tiles, my heart thumping against my ribcage and the floor beneath me. I hear a soft pitter-patter running along the ceiling somewhere to my right, and listen as it vanishes almost certainly down the tracks into the depths, perhaps to alert its demonic brethren further down. I stand up slowly, expecting to see the creature jump out of the darkness towards me. But nothing. And after a reassuring deep breath, I make my way to the edge of the tracks and drop down. I twist the top of my cheap steel flashlight. As the light begins to dim, I make my way down the tracks and towards their home, towards what I almost know to be my death. The shrieks and hungry howls I hear on the way should be enough to force me to turn around and run as fast as I can back up the tunnel and back to the surface. But I can't abandon Nate, because he's never abandoned me. He's always been loyal, and I know if I do, the shame and guilt I'll hold will kill me quicker than any demon. After what seems like hours, but probably no longer than 20 minutes, I come to a junction in the tracks in a train carriage. Once lit up like a Christmas tree, full of commuters going about their day, and now lies decrepit and lifeless, and whatever may be alive within certainly isn't human. The door of the carriage is torn open, hanging by no more than one or two of its hinges. I make my way past the door and into the carriage, and the first evidence of those things lies in front of me. Hundreds of prints overlapping one another, left in blood from feet and paws and things that resemble hooves like that of a pig, but much larger. In some, you could make out the long claws and talons, used to disembowel and dismember people like myself, people foolish enough to enter their domain. The howls are louder and closer now, no more than 4, maybe 500 meters in front of me. I don't walk. I crouch down and make my way through the carriage. Small pieces of entrails and viscera lie strewn across the floor of the carriage. I do my best to not stand on them, but feel the stickiness of the congealed blood and fluids beneath my feet. I can hear them outside the carriages at either side, the crunching of bone and soft wet sound of them devouring flesh, snorts and growls as they do so. I feel like standing up and running. My whole body and mind are screaming too, but as hard as it is, I ignore it and push forward, slowly but surely following into what I can only hope to be the steps of Nate's abductor. I see the end of the carriage in front of me, and once again go prone and begin crawling towards it, the flashlight slightly illuminating the sides of the door. When I finally make it to it, I'm met with the sight I know will never leave me until the day I die. In front of me, facing away crouched over Nate, the figure of the stalker, the skin of its back pale with a sickly green hue, sores and scabs appearing at intervals across it, and its spine jutting out beneath its irregularly long body. Its gangly arms lie by its side. It reminds me of a ghoulish painting I had once seen years before the crossing, in a basement close to my old home in Boston, by an artist called Pickman. In front of it, all around, lay numerous piles of bodies and body parts, and atop and between them, demons of all kinds, horns and snouts jutting out from between the mess, while others were covered with thick, dark fur, slick with blood of those poor souls brought down here. near the top of the closest pile, 8 or 9 meters in front of me, a demon lies facing down, with appendages like that of a spider, connected to a body which, although malformed, appears human. But all recognition of humanity fades away as I see the antenna on its head like that of a mantis or a beetle, its head buried in the torso of what looks like to be the remains of a woman. At first, I think Nate is dead, but I see the slow and steady rise and fall of his chest. He's still alive. I then realize this is my one and only chance to save him before he's brought deep into the tunnels towards whatever dark and evil thing waits to change him into a creature, like those around me, for use in filling this pit with more sustenance for those things' unquenchable thirst. They don't appear to notice the dim light from the torch, and I leave it on the floor beside me, facing the back of the stalker. I slip my hand down my side into my belt and slowly withdraw the military knife from the holster beneath it. I slowly pull myself forward. Every second seems like minutes. And slowly I swing my legs down from the carriage and find myself outside. My shadow now printed on the back of the stalker in front of me. I know one mistake, one wrong move or step, and I'll alert it and every single creature around me. I feel the sweat begin to build on my forehead and spend a split second planning my attack. I creep to the side of the creature's back, and as my foot steps forward, simultaneously I bring one arm forward along the side of its head, my hand open to cover the creature's mouth. As the other stabs upward, the tip of the blade slicing through the floor of its mouth and up into its brain. I feel its lips move beneath my hand as it attempts to let out a cry, but it's too late, and I feel its body go limp and drop to the floor beneath me. A few seconds afterwards, it's the most alert I have ever been. I wait to hear the howls of the revenge from the other demons sealing my fate, but they never come, and they continue to feast unbeknownst to what has happened. I slide my hands under Nate and pick him up slowly and carefully and cradle him between my chest and shoulders and slowly crawl back into the carriage. The journey back through the tunnels is twice as fast as the journey down, and although still aware of the dangers alerting one of those creatures, I quicken my pace. Before I know it, I'm hoisting myself back to the top of the platform next to the tracks and feel Nate's body begin to twitch and jerk against me. Just as I near the top of the escalators and feel the sunlight from the surface shine on my face, his eyes flicker and open, and he licks the side of my cheek.
A few weeks ago, my friends and I decided to go on a camping trip to celebrate the end of the semester, as has been the tradition for a few years. This time, my buddy Alex suggested that we try a new campsite to mix things up. He said that he'd found a good one that not a lot of people frequent, so there was a good chance we'd have the place to ourselves. All of us were excited to see this new site. There supposedly was even a lake not too far away. As soon as final exams finished, we hauled our stuff into the van and took off. The drive was about 4 hours, but the extra time was well worth it once we got to the campgrounds. Alex was right, there was nobody here. Plus, William brought some pot along, so this was shaping up to be a great trip. The parking lot was at the bottom of a large hill. The grounds were in a large and dense forest, and it looked like there were some great hiking trails. I told Alex and William that we'd have to come back here again. They agreed. It was a solid 45 minutes before we reached Alex's totally dope campsite at the top of the hill. It was actually pretty great. Even if it was a difficult trek through the forest to get there, there was a nice clearing and a pretty good view of some of the hiking trails. Plus, it was early enough in the summer for weather that wasn't too hot. We set up our tent and went to get wood for our campfire. It was getting late and we were tired, so Alex promised to show us the lake the next day. The goddamn mosquitoes are everywhere. Alex smacked his shoulder. I can't believe I forgot the bug spray. This is where it gets fuzzy. Maybe it was the pot. It probably was the pot. But I swear to God, there was someone watching us. Beyond the light of the fire, I could see the dark outline of something standing in the trees. It was too far away to make out much detail, so I was not sure if it was a person or an animal. I pointed it out to William and Alex, but they said they didn't see anything. As the night went on, I noticed that the thing was still there, and that it had not moved. It was starting to weird me out. I decided to go tell whoever or whatever this was to fuck off. When I got up and made my way into the trees, the figure was no longer there, but I definitely heard something walking around, twigs snapping under its feet with each step. Finally, I found it. I was close enough to make out some details this time. Paralyzed with fear, I froze as soon as I saw the creature in front of me. It definitely wasn't human. At first glance, it could have been a deer or some other animal, but as I looked again, its glowing eyes and long limbs that came to the sharp points of razor-like claws were all that I could focus on. I used to camp a lot as a kid, and I was pretty into it for a long time, but I could not identify this creature, not even in the slightest. Before I could get a word out, the creature sprinted toward me, pulling itself forward for a few steps before lurching at me on its hind legs. Claws outstretched, I turned and ran the other way. I immediately hooked my foot under a log and smacked hard onto the ground. The creature's skeletal hands came within inches of my throat, and everything went black. I woke up the next morning in my sleeping bag. Naturally, my friends didn't believe my story, and though I never forgot about it, I was able to move the occurrence to the back of my mind and chalk it up to the drugs. After all, when I said it out loud, it did seem ridiculous. It still shook me though, and I wouldn't have been surprised if I saw that creature in my nightmares for many nights to come. The sun was just beginning to set when Alex brought us to the lake. The golden rays reflecting off the gentle water made me feel completely relaxed. As we swam out to the middle of the small body of water, I could feel my remaining fear of the creature from the previous night falling away. Maybe there wasn't anything to worry about. Plus, I'd have a great campfire story for next year. After about 30 minutes in the water, Alex, William, and I began to make our way toward the shore. To my right, water sprayed into my face as Alex splashed around next to me. Hey man, knock it off. He was on the swim team, so I thought he was just dicking around. But when I turned to look at him, I saw that he was thrashing just under the surface, desperately trying to get above the water. It looked like he was drowning. Something's down there. Alex finally broke through the surface of the lake, flailing his arms and gasping for air. Not a second after he said those words, he was yanked sharply downward. Mid-breath, his words were garbled by the water rushing into his lungs. Something in the water. William and I both dove down looking for Alex, but we could not find him. It was too dark to see anything. Alex had vanished. What the fuck was that? I sputtered. I could only think about the creature I saw the night before. Could it swim? What else was out here? All the color had drained from William's body as he raised a shaking hand, pointing at a dark figure on the shore. Its bright eyes stared into my core as it stood there on its hind legs, its claws sticking out of Alex's chest after dragging him from the lake. Blood ran in long dark trails all around my best friend's torso. I almost threw up right there. There was no logical way that thing could have dragged a 150-pound star swimmer out from the middle of the lake and onto the shore in 45 seconds. William and I stayed where we were, treading water as the monster stared us down. There was no way we could escape. Slowly, the creature let go of Alex and stood up straight. Jesus. It had to be 7 or 8 feet tall. Its head leaned forward, eyes unblinking, glowing dimly in the darkness. William and I were stuck where we were, fear electrifying every nerve as we knew that all we could do was wait. We were going to die in that lake, ripped apart and dragged under the water. The creature began to circle the lake. It was hunting us, I was sure. William and I spun slowly as it moved around us, not wanting to take our eyes off of it for a second. A splash echoed out at the far end of the water as the creature dove toward us. William and I swam faster than anyone should have been able to. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and miraculously, I found myself dragging my body onto the sand and pulling myself to my feet. I ran to the campsite and hurriedly grabbed Alex's bag, hoping the car keys were inside. Fear pushed me through the trees as I sprinted past the tent and on the way to the bottom of the hill. William was right behind me until I heard him cry out in pain before smacking into the dirt. Holy shit. It felt like I was running forever. My lungs burned, and my throat was raw with each breath. I thought it was out of my control. My legs were forced to slow down due to exhaustion. Every so often, the snapping of twigs and pounding footsteps behind me propelled me down the hill. Finally, I reached the car. I dumped the contents of the backpack onto the pavement, scooping up the keys and his cell phone. My trembled fingers fumbled the keys before I was able to cram them into the ignition and floor it out of the parking lot. Weeks have passed since that camping trip, and I still cannot process what happened. As soon as I was far enough away from the campsite, I used Alex's phone to call the police and report an animal attack. A big animal. A group of officers went out to the campgrounds, where they found the mutilated bodies of Alex and William. A bear, they told me. This is the first time I've told anyone about the creature I saw. Part of me doesn't want to admit that it really happened, but I wasn't high that night in the lake, and I was not hallucinating. I'm still afraid that thing will find me again. I don't go camping anymore.